Друзья, продолжаем нашу секцию «SOC будущего».
Dear friends, we continue.
На тему новый SIEM, существующий SOC.
Now, the next presentation will be on the new SIEM in an existing SOC. Gennadiy, next to you.
Так, добрый день, коллеги. Сейчас появится QR-код.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues. And the QR code here should help you.
Вот такой красивый код.
Isn't that beautiful?
Да, теперь начнем с того. Меня зовут Геннадий, я очень много лет работаю уже в СОКах, работаю с SIEM.
My name is Gennadiy. I've been working with SIEM systems and at SOCs for a very long time. Now, import substitution became a new thing quite recently. And I'm here to tell you about import substitution of SOCs. Now, this is a brief description of me. You know, I was rewarded for a bunch of things. You know, for example, I've been a maintainer of a library used in a SIEM system. I've also been supporting the exporter used for MPCM. And together with my people, we are running this project called VS Code XP Workspace for Apple ARM. Now, this is obviously a rule development system. I'm also currently the head of supporting and developing cybersecurity monitoring system at BI.ZONE.
О чем мы сейчас будем говорить? Будет два больших блока. Первый блок — это контентная часть, второй блок — это...
There are two main parts to my presentation. One is the content, so to speak, and the other is architecture.
Я называю контентом. В ПТ это называется экспертизой, это правила нормализации, обогащения.
Now, when I talk about content, I talk about normalization and alerting rules.
Алгоритмы действий, которые можно
So here we'll be talking about specific algorithms of action and the methodology for development, such as code writing standards. So that, for example, different analysts produce code of, say, comparable beauty. If your SOC is using a particular data model, then the taxonomy of this data model should be synchronized with the data models you use elsewhere, so that your TI systems and your IRP systems, they use the same. Because what sometimes happens is that analysts used to one system will be applying the same paradigm. And then you turn to a different SIEM, and it turns out it is not fit for this paradigm.
Вопросы, которые нужно прорабатывать дополнительно в такой важной части, как исключение, потому что бывает...
So obviously you need to be very careful around exceptions.
Ты написал контент.
Because what can easily happen is that you develop a piece of content and it generates FPs, and then you need to introduce exceptions into either the code or various lists. And making sure that your content is up to date is another important function. So, for example, you might have users, operating, one version of your MSSP, and others running a different version. So you see where it's going. Now, architecture-wise, we'll be talking about SIEM architecture, network access, VPN, integration with TI-IRP and portals, content delivery. So, for example, if you have a standalone SOC, you've developed some integrations over the years. Content delivery, I've just mentioned it. When you're just starting out, you can do manual content delivery, but going forward, you will need to do GetOps, so that you can develop different pack contents for different clients. Well, you've just heard about automated testing. So this is something you can also do for your systems. Next one is health model and monitoring, another important consideration. So, when you have your system, it's important for you to understand what a healthy system is and what it is not. We're usually monitoring for standard things like memory usage, disk usage, load averages. However, the system itself can have some logical aspects to be monitored. So, for example, if you have numerous clients, you may want to monitor for things like license expiry. Now let's talk about content. What are the algorithms, so to speak, out there? Now, obviously, you have some rules. Some of these rules are test ones, others not so. So you'll need to decide which content you are going to move to the new SIEM and which not, because, some leftovers, so to speak, may be of very little use. So next, you got to do a rule type identification. So, for example, some rules are very simple, like they will only react to a single event. Others are triggered by rather event chains. So you need to set your priorities straight. Next, we do 20 by 80 grouping or Pareto law grouping. That is, 20% of our content that covers 80% of the needs of our clients should ideally be identified. Now, there may very well be some unique rules that you will want to move to the new CM system. However, a unique rule can easily consume too much, brain power of your analysts. For example, if they need to develop whole kill chains, and they can be quite complex, and therefore it's a good idea to follow the Pareto law or Pareto rule. Now, some content is personalized, so you may want to set some priorities for it. Managing exceptions, I think I've mentioned this already. So analysts used to working with a single system. They will often do profiling inside the rule code, which is not a perfect idea, given that some CMs are not happy if you do that. Moreover, you will have some unique clients that have some, unique data, so hard coding it into the rules is a bad idea. It's much better to use lists or tables. In terms of methodology, what matters is the style of your content. Like if you have templates, so that the analyst knows that if they write the rule down in a particular style, the other analyst will be able to understand what it says and they will be able to respond faster. And if an analyst is using his or her own template, it can be very difficult for others to use it because, this way conditions are, so to speak, more complicated. You'll have to sort of manually count all the brackets. So wrapping your mind around it can be more difficult. So there are also matrices and templates that you can use for requesting data or whatever. And that should certainly help you at some stages when you can use, for example, filters and matrices to select the data that you need. And after you've developed your development methodology, you can also structure your expertise into packages, or you can separate and delineate your content based on TTPs. Also, when you review your rules, for example, sometimes you need to change your normalization rules, or maybe do some correlations. So you may want to review it all. Now about data model synchronization. So some SOCs rely on a data model, and that's a good thing to have. Particularly, if you've developed this stuff for the SOC in particular, even better if it's fully integrated with the other data models that you have, because then you should be able to link all these products in a single chain. So you may want to check the mapping and see what goes where from each field, and budget enough time for processing.
сначала выявили те паки, которые мы хотим протестировать.
So the first thing we did was to identify the packets, or the packages rather, that we wanted to test. Then we sort of build it into the logic of the SIEM. So BASs have already been mentioned. Now imagine that you're running an attack and you see that, the old CM would react to it and the new one doesn't. Again, you will want to see why this is the case. Also, you got to go for the bottlenecks.
Есть всегда там какие-то ограничения. Эти ограничения нужно найти, с ними...
All rules will have their constraints and limitations, so it's important to identify them and address them. Next one is reworking the logic, because imagine you have rules that were developed several years ago and they're based on the old paradigm. In some cases, you will be dealing with events at a scale different from what you expected, so you may want to revisit it. So whenever you switch to a new CM system, it's a good idea to actualize your old settings, so to speak. And you will also want to redo your old playbooks. Next, you got to consider automated rule testing and content versioning. And prepare log packages for testing. But I won't go into this because this has already been mentioned by the other speakers. Although it's quite important for sure. Now let's talk architecture. So you should be able to use this hybrid version where, in the client's architecture, everything sits in the CM, and then you connect to the CM using various portals. Or it could be cloud-based where the client is only running collectors, so these collectors collect data and then send it to the cloud-based or cloud-deployed CM. And it could be quite useful and quite convenient for the client.
Выгодно бывает такой вариант. Также, когда настраиваются сетевые доступы, нужно для...
Also, when you set up network access, you also need to identify the specific addresses and the same and specific ports that are allowed to be used, and what it should be integrated with. Could be ERP system or, say, a backup system and so on. Also, the integrations that I've mentioned. There could be many integrations inside the SOC. It could be TI platforms or IRP or correlations. So it's also very important to consider how all these integrations will work in the new CM system. You will probably start with manual content delivery, where, content is moved around in small packages. However, it's still a good idea to implement GitOps and then deliver it automatically. I find it also quite important. Now about the health model. Again, I think I've mentioned it briefly, haven't I? So quite often, we want to see not just physical metrics such as memory usage, but also some logical metrics. With the system, for example, telling you that I'm experiencing this system, I cannot put such and such amount of data in a table list, or such and such things get triggered way too often. So if you have a single health model and you do monitoring based on that, it will help you a lot in terms of managing your CM. What I show here is an example of such monitoring. When you have lots and lots of clients, actually you'll want to make sure that, their licenses are good. And having an alert linked to, soon
отчетов, которые доставляются заказчикам, и
to the expiration of their license coming soon is a good idea. Now, reporting also needs to be brought up to date, so your new CM system should also be sort of standardized so that, there are the same reports for everybody, so that your client doesn't really notice if you've changed your CM or not.
Так, здесь мои контакты.
These are my contact details.
Спасибо вам за внимание.
And thanks for your attention.
Да, Геннадий, спасибо.
Yes, thank you very much, Gennadiy.
Наших зрителей.
I have a couple of questions submitted by the audience.
Переносили правила между SIEM.
So how did you move rules from one CM to another?
Есть какая-то автоматизация.
Was it done by the analysts manually, or are you doing any particular automation to help you in this respect?
Двух сторон, когда контент переносится из одной
Well,
системы.
when content is moved from one system to another, analysts will be reading the rules because they will need to, understand and check the logic, and they will kind of manually transfer it to the new CM, also checking if that works. Now, if you need to deliver rules from the dev server to the client instance or installation, you'd better do it in an automated way.
Ну, есть, опять же, процесс написания контента, когда...
Now, there is also the process of writing the content when your analysts are analyzing the rules, for example, in one system and putting them in another system. And it's a totally different process when you just need to deploy it to your client server. So the first one, the former, is manual, the second one is automated. At least they should be. Gotcha. Another question? I think this will be the last one. How long does it take for you to do this kind of transition? Well, that's a great question. Although it's quite challenging, because it really depends on what you already have in your SOC. If you have, for example, spare engineers who can do this kind of content writing, well, you're blessed. And if the rule set you have, like, let's imagine you have 5,000 rules, and you've identified 3,000 rules that need to be sort of transitioned, and your analysts produce like 10 rules per day, well, it will take you like 6 months. But if you got to do some complex integrations, and you don't really have enough people, and you also have, say, dependencies with the IRP, it can take a year, maybe a year and a half. Thank you.